Okay, so I'm going to open up, I grabbed these, some examples of what we might go through. So the end result, Ryan Farrell and I did this the other day. We went through an article, and then I've got a few more here actually to also look through. But what we're trying to do is say what are our main arguments, and perhaps a brief explanation, but then back it up with quotations that support the point of views. And it looks like this. So to do it, what I think the problem that many people have is when they start researching, they just take a topic, proportionality of rehabilitation is nonsensical, and they view that as the only thing that they're doing and put blinders on to everything else they come across. And what we want to do is kind of be the opposite of that, where this is more of a prompt. I'm setting out to research proportionality of rehabilitation, but if I find something else or different or better, then I'm going to grab that. And so we more want to look at blocking articles than at just completing these topics, okay? So I found, as I was researching something really quickly, this one about punishment prisons in the Bible and justifying our retributive culture. That sounds super interesting. I found this on the philosophy and history of prisons, and I found this on rehabilitation in punitive era, gap between rhetoric and reality. Do any of these jump out at you as more interesting?
What was the second one?
It's a chapter from some book about history of prison.
Yeah, I think the first one sounds.
Yeah, the first one sounded interesting because of the justifying that.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what we'll do is I'm going to open in another application, a Google document, so that we can rapidly go from one to the other. And it needs to be on personal, not work. And Mark, just tell me where's like a... Is it in here?
Yeah, go to debate, and then LD, and there you go.
Okay, I'll just create a new document here. I usually like to have kind of this unorganized queue and just throw stuff into it and then put it into our table of contents at a different time. So that you don't allow like, oh no, I don't know where this goes to stand in the way of capturing good stuff.
Mm.
Okay. And then I usually, if I know I'm going to grab some quotes from it, which sometimes I skim a little bit to see, I'll go ahead and make the citation at the top to make it simple and quick. So I'm going to do that now.
Yeah, that's usually what I'll do is like if I find a good article that I know I'm going to take a few pieces of evidence from, I'll just go ahead and cite it out so that way I can just copy and paste the citation each time I quote it.
Okay, and that's interesting because it's not letting my Command Shift V remove formatting paste work for some reason. That's no fun. I'm gonna... Okay, whatever. And then I usually want to grab his citation. Oh, he's a professor of law, JD, Harvard Law School. Okay, and then we want to find where it was published, the Cardozo Law Review. In well, when was this published?
I think I saw 2006.
You're right. Yep. Okay. Volume 28-2, 2006. Okay. So there's our citation. And we'll be hitting that lots of times. And now we just start skimming and reading and finding interesting things. If that's not big enough here, I can make it a tad bigger. Okay, so this tag is my summary of the warrants contained in the card. The warrants being prison's our most common form of punishment, USA, rehabilitation used to be primary justification, and it's not anymore since the 1970s. So that to me is a prediction of what would be in that paragraph, right? And then we can do this if we want to one at a time, or usually I actually just go and do it all later.
All right, so that's like one block of evidence, I guess, that you would be quoting when you're supporting your side. And so do you just have several blocks of those different things? And would you need to go through the names and all that every single time you were to quote it? Or is that just to back it up?
It's the reason that you want to paste this over and over is because we're going to take this whole blocked card, and after we have, let's say, 15 of these, they're going to be sorted from this unorganized queue file into like our big club positions. So this card, and let's just say, we'll actually create another one here in a second, but this card and the next card may end up in two different spots, at which point the citation would become separated. So if you had only put it once, you might end up with a quotation and not knowing where it's from when you pasted the other claim into a different document. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got that. That makes sense now. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so now this is a super long quote. What I want to do is summarize the warrants that I'm trying to get at the top, and then I'm just going to underline the key portions. Because of oral law, first warrant, an eye for an eye really meant monetary compensation.
So a question I have is that whenever I would have like all these different proofs or evidence for and quotations pretty much for my side, especially when I'm negative. And so my opponent brings up, the cliche arguments, and I have a ton of stuff to read, but I guess I had a hard time, organizing it and selecting which ones would be most fitting for the certain situation which I was in. So how would I to make this more streamlined to make my I don't know.
No, it's the challenge. So you end up with lots of stuff, and what you usually are going to do is the first speech, you'll end up with like your favorite quotes. These are the ones I like for this and that. But then depending on their response, you end up having such customized quotations that it's evident how well researched you are. So let's take this for an example. If in the NC we said actually the original lex talionis, eye for an eye, meant compensation, which was restorative and rehabilitative. Then they came back and they said, well, in the United States, it was rehabilitation was never the reason for punitiveness. Then we'd be like, ho, 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 actually, it was. And we would quote this one. But if they said some other argument, this would just go unused forever.
Okay.
So you end up using, I think, about 10 to 15% of what you save.
And you just not customize, but you have the quotations customized to their responses and just have it ready at a moment's notice.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's why these tags are so crucial, because it allows you to scan through 5 pages of quotes in like 30 seconds of prep time and say, oh, this is going to be the one. Look at those warrants. You know, they said eye for an eye. I've got a tag with eye for an eye in it. This is probably the right one. And
so you just grab it, and I'm assuming you won't be able to skim all that in prep time. So when you're going up there, do you just kind of pray that the quote's going to be appropriate, or do you already read the quote?
So at a novice level, you do, but as you get more advanced, what you do is you, Edward Tufte, and he has a book called Beautiful Evidence, and is like a general communications guy. He says the process is called scan, focus, consume. So what you want to do is you want to scan your taglines, these bold statements, focus on one, choose this is probably it, but then go ahead and skim this quote. And that process of doing all that is probably a 45-second process.
Right.
And so you can do that, first of all, 3 or 4 times if somebody has a complete off-the-wall case. But second of all, you should get to a point where you know a lot of this stuff already, and you like already have favorite cards, in which case that 45 seconds goes to 5.
Yeah, that's another thing I was going to point out that kind of gets brought up under this, is that you should really know your evidence very well. Of course, you would have read the ones that you put in there, but that's why it's also important on our LD neg file to be reading through what other people put on there as well, because you want to be as familiar with the evidence that you have as possible.
All right. Yeah, I'll make sure to look at that more.
Yeah, and that's why, like, I just remember, team policy days when, like, your affirmative case, you would build it so much over the year that you would have, like, 60 pages of backup evidence, and I would even have friends who had more than that. So, but it felt like a lot, but because you knew it so well, you could pull out what you wanted in a short amount of time to respond to their specific argument.
So what lesson are you on 64? Okay, so let's recheck it some. Practice it first. Okay. Ones, so we're starting here. Ones, tens, hundredths, tenths.
Okay.
$3, 8 dimes, 4 pennies.
Would you mind muting if you're not talking?
$12.60 and
I'm hearing $12.60 math in the background.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. I like keeping these at 2 lines. And on reread, I don't think that this is necessary. Really. Okay, so this, like, if I were planning to debate, I would be trying to lead up to this and not retribution, where the primary purposes of criminal punishment. Great line to end on.
By the way, Isaiah, I wanted to make sure we are recording this, right?
I did start a recording program. So hopefully it works. Yes. Okay. So on we go. Oops. This is really interesting, actually. Oh, it says the word punishment. I like that. And then go adjust the tag actually a little bit. Yeah. Cities of refuge were the rehabilitative alternative to prison as punishment in Jewish law. I should say A, because he didn't say the. Okay, and I'll go. Oh yeah, because here's another one. I'm actually going to stick this into the quote. Cool.
So when we're just reading through a regular article, would we usually be copying pasting this much, or would we be more selective, or is this a good general amount of taking stuff?
So far I have selected probably 80% of the material, but that's just because we're at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Typically your introductory and concluding paragraphs are the best from long journal articles. And you're going to skip huge sections in the middle. But basically anything that seems like it might be useful, you go ahead and save.
All right.
Because using this tagline system, if it doesn't turn out to be useful, no big deal. It's just a little bit of space.
And that's the great thing is having all of this here is afterwards you can look at our neg file and kind of look at all the positions we have and realize that several pieces of these evidence actually go really well to support positions, and so you could add them to the file and stuff like that.
I'm actually going to grab this because it doesn't take very long to say. Locking someone in a cell defeats that purpose. Now you notice as we underline, I've seen people who will they'll underline like this word and that word and that word, like one at a time and chop it to bits. If the author were to look at our underlining here, that author over our shoulder would say, yes, that is a fair representation of what I said. And so it's applying the author over the shoulder principle while shortening from journal to the format of public speaking. Okay, so now we get a roadmap. Part 1 of this article examines possible reasons to use prison as a modality of punishment and discusses the historical shift in the U.S. from rehabilitation to retribution as the dominant rationale for imprisonment. Okay, so I'm interested in that second part, but not so interested in the first part of part 1. Part 2 sounds really interesting. And part 3... maybe one card from part 3 is going to be useful. I don't think part 4 is going to be useful. Oh, and it looks like we can get our 2 alternatives again with additional solvency evidence. Okay. I'm starting to understand this more, but this reflects what the Mike Materney stuff says about you have 2 reasons, deontological and utilitarian. So deontological is like balancing the scales, and utilitarian is like deterrence. It makes us safer. And I find that talking about my opponent's viewpoint being utilitarian is pretty persuasive. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. Completely unrelated to what we're talking about. I know that we have or we need a section on this difference between utilitarian and deontological viewpoints to use, because that's great at the value level debate. So I grab it and I say 2 purposes of punishment. Categories: deontological and utilitarian. And so that's where I made that point earlier about that's not really why we started getting into this article. This is going to be tossed to some completely different section.
And so when we're going through the articles, we should just have an open mind for whatever would jump out relating to almost any topic within the resolution that we know could provide support. So is that basically the reason?
Exactly.
So it's not going into there with, all right, I'm going to look for everything about, reasons for rehabilitation or something. It's just open-minded?
Yes.
Okay, good stuff, good stuff.
And so here, I look at this and I say, there are at least 4 questions to be involved in discussing theories of punishment. Why punish? Who should we punish? How much punishment? And what mode? This is great because I think a lot of our opponents dive straight to question 4 and skip some of 1 and 2.
Yeah, I can see that.
So this is turning out to be a more fruitful article than I expected. Wow. I'm going to grab this, but I don't think it deserves its own card. But I'm going to stick it right here like that. And the reason is, if I was in a debate round and I wanted to apply a criteria to my opponent's value structure and just say they failed to meet basic criteria of having a philosophy of punishment, I would see this as I was preparing to get up and be like, oh, here's this sweet example. I could just explain this, probably in fewer words, the different types of things, and deciding, is this worth fine, a certain number of lashes, or a certain number of days in jail, that's roughly equivalent. So I keep it not with the intention of ever quoting it, but the intention of inspiring an example or line of argument that comes out of my mouth. That's so fascinating. Like, I'm not going to save it, but this is the benefit of doing research. This thought is now forever in my head, that the American viewpoint on why to punish and stuff has changed constantly. But for some reason, we keep using prison as the way to do it. Hmm. Okay, so now we're to the second part of part one, like I was saying, which I thought might be more interesting. This is great. I want to quote this in the beginning of an affirmative speech. It's probably why it was called a penitentiary, come to think of it. So like here, I debated about this sentence. It's more convenient to skip what's highlighted here, but that particular statement, without the parenthetical full warrants for it, is the author discounting this conclusion, the end of the sentence. And so we should not make the author appear to be 100% conclusive, as in this underlined section, because he did list this one discount. And so in as short as possible as we can, we want to identify that the author wasn't laying this as a 100% conclusion. Now you could say with exceptions, but we want to keep it true to the author. So we list the specific one. If someone in cross-examination were to say, well, why was that an exception? Here's why. But I think this goes far enough to represent what the author is saying. Because he's actually trying to say, not this, but this. Wow. See, again here, it would actually be legitimate to just underline it like this. I want to underline the rest of it for persuasive reasons, which is any time we can say a buzz phrase of the resolution, we should. And here it specifically says the phrase criminal justice system. Very nice. Okay, here, you sometimes want to grab the section title as part of your quotation. This is actually a really good response. So now, I would argue that this is AF. Which most of our work here is neg or generic. It's saying that the medical model of crime as illness was largely rejected by right and left after the 1960s. So when somebody tries to run that argument we have about, it's like the C.S. Lewis argument about treating crime as an illness, we might say actually that approach was abandoned.
Out of curiosity, though, that argument wouldn't. In some ways, I could see how that could help the negative, because I think what they would say is that treating crime as a mental illness was the same thing that came out of America's reliance on rehabilitation, which the article also mentions, which is why America switched to have its focus on retribution,
I see what
because
you
they
mean.
realized how bad of an idea
You're right.
that using it as a mental illness was.
You're right. No, that's a great point. All right, I'm going to leave that off. More radical advantage. I see. So this is when they started critiquing rehabilitation. But what I think he's going to conclude is the author of this whole article, is that the critiques of rehabilitation were critiques of a straw man. They critiqued 1960s rehabilitation, not the 200 years of rehabilitation that preceded it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that will help build the argument once we find that conclusion. Because if he definitely says that, then yeah, that would be a great argument to respond to the negative side with. Because like that's something I noticed when I watched the round with Jake Hatfield and Kaylin Elliott, because we were doing a double flight.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that's kind of what I feel like Jake did, is he chose the extreme of what can come out of retribution. And so I feel like this kind of counteracts the argument of them being able to pull out the extremes of what comes out of rehabilitation.
Right. So the argument is roughly, my opponent indicted 1960s rehabilitation, not the 200-year-old rehabilitative model the USA was used to. That's a sweet response. So I'm going to call this rhetoric. I usually don't use much of this in the brief, but it's kind of cool. Whoops. Okay. And then, so I guess continuing, as we do this, if we know what other people's assignments are and come across something really helpful to them, we should send it to them. In this case, I happen to have there's a debater in Tennessee who's also an ethos blogger who is writing a blog on the Martinson study. I'm going to send him this and say, hey, check this out. So I go to wherever it was. Who was it? Noah Farley. We were blocking from this article, and you need to see the section around pages 720 through 723. Talks about basically how the Martinson article study indicted a 1960s model of rehabilitation that was not the real version of rehabilitation for the previous 200 years. In other words, okay. So I sent him that. And example. There we go. So we pass research on to people if it's going to be useful to them, even though we don't really see that for the briefs we're doing. Wow, by 1983, every state but Wisconsin had adopted a mandatory minimum. That's amazing. They eliminated parole in 84. You know what? So I doubt I'll forget this. This is very borderline savable to me. But other people in club might benefit from it because they didn't do the reading we did. So I'm going to go ahead and include it. The shift from 1960s rehabilitation included mandatory minimums in all states. 3, strikes laws, elimination of federal parole, etc.
This kind of makes me wonder when federal parole was reinstated.
Is it reinstated?
Oh, I guess, is it just a state thing then?
I think, for some reason, I remember criminal justice year, people running a case. I thought it was to reinstitute federal parole, but I don't really remember. And so the combination of these factors led to a ballooning prison population. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and have this just cause. And this is like an impact of the change. Impact of shift in 1970s and beyond towards away from, it doesn't say retribution, so I say away from rehabilitation. We know he's going to conclude towards retribution, but he hasn't actually said it. And so in this case, if I had said from retribution, I might be putting another debater out on a limb where in debate round, they read that tag and are like, oh, okay, so it says it shifted from retribution. The reality is, yes, the author clearly means that and is about to say it, but it's not in this quote. So we don't want to hang anybody out to dry. This is cool though because it is going to end up being a direct link from retributive thinking and anti-rehabilitative thinking, which is you end up with ballooning, whatever. Okay, so now this. I'm now going to send it to, we want to send this to Veronica, our clubmate, because she has an affirmative case based on the costs. So we say, hey, Veronica, check this out for your AF. Look at pages 723 and 724 on departure from rehabilitation leading to crazy high costs in system, one of your AF points. Send on, done. I'm not going to say that. Mark, if you thought it was relevant, I could though. Interesting. So the retributivist mood was accompanied by cuts in rehabilitation, training programs, education, etc. And the trend is unlikely to change. A policy debater would love that quote because it is attitudinal inherency, like showing the direction.
So I did have a question. So when you give the tag, you want to have all of the key warrants that are brought up in the piece of evidence. But when you're reading a tag in the round, how would you recommend being able to shorten it on the spot and just read like 5 sentences for the judge?
Mm-hmm.
I mean 5 words.
So in the round, you're making a claim, right? Like contention, a response, something like that. This is not really a claim. It's a list of warrants. So you should never read any of this in the round. Ever. You shouldn't read a shorter version, nothing. Instead, you should use your mind and strategy to craft whatever your response is in that round. This helped you find the quote, and then the quote supports your response. So let's just say, for example, that you had made an argument that the United States has a balance of rehabilitation and retribution. In that case, I might respond as follows. My response is empirically denied. There's actually data pointing out the other direction. Let me give you some examples according to Martin Pritkin. So none of this said empirically denied. Now, if I wanted to, I might say my response 1 is retributivist mood. According to Martin, whatever. And so that's a fine response, but I guess like you could even just say my response is not true. According to Martin Pritkin, blah, blah, blah. Am I making sense?
Yeah, definitely. I really like this way of doing it because it was actually a lot different than my previous coaches taught, because they would have us tag our evidence and they told us it should be like at a maximum of like 5 or 6 words.
Right.
And then whatever that tag was, like that's what we read out loud in the round. But this just makes so much more sense to be able to just shortly give something to the judge and then don't even go into the tag and just go into the evidence and the arguments to support your claim.
Yes. And so that actually has its source in one of the worst ambiguities that exists, which is the difference between tagging an argument and tagging a quotation. Because an evidence tag should have all the warrants. An argument tag should be something really easy to write down, 2 to 5 words, right? And so that's not wrong. But the problem is that people who didn't like have formal training in debate and just sort of picked it up, or people who, parents, coaches, often don't know that distinction. So they hear the word tag and they just think, oh, so it must be a tag, therefore, and they pick one, which usually they pick, your tag should be short. They're right. But then they apply that to this because we call it tag too. So I've written about that tags site.com multiple times. So we've got what makes a good tag. And here's pointing out that distinction. There are 2 types of tags. How to do what we're doing, which is grabbing our tags from the card. And again, we have the 2 meanings of the word tag. And then this one. Actually, this is probably worth reading because there are multiple ones. Significance, value, that's funny. And then tag versus tag. So you've just hit on a deep miscommunication in debaterland. Hopefully some people watching this video will find that useful. All right. Despite the growth of prisons and the worsening of prison. Poll. Oh, see, now this is interesting. I'm going to go ahead and grab this. It would be to refute an argument that no one has made this year yet that I've seen, but could easily be made. Someone could just go with a pure statistical approach and say, look, the United States increased its number of laws and increased its incarceration and retributivism, and crime went down. It's those charts that Greg Remke showed. This is trying to show that crime went down whether you had these laws or not. Just crime went down. So we will say no direct causal link between retribution in California and New York City and crime reduction because it was a national trend. And I probably should underline that, but I'm not going to. Another thing that you do sometimes in a round, like in round, you sort of underline. My partner and I, throughout all college, we would put all of our evidence in page protectors, and we had little erasable things that work on page protectors, and we would like highlight or underline right there what part of the card we might read if it was like this. Oh, it says in fact the opposite is true. Well, that's good. Now we do have to underline because it's getting so big. Lame. Yeah, we need to have, Mark, by the way, at some point, just a thing on the difference between recidivism and crime. I think people are equating the two, and they're saying, look at these high recidivism rates. Yeah, but maybe you have high recidivism rates because the amount of people committing crimes is like down to just the kind of people who commit crimes, meaning less crime overall. So having high recidivism is not an indicator of high crime.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I can I feel like that would be a good thing to add to that generic briefs folder that I created. So I can work on finding some stuff on that. Here, I'll actually go ahead and create a document for that, and so that way I'll remind myself to work on it.
Okay. So it's interesting. So we just had, this is the typical law review. We got back to Jewish stuff. I'm like, oh, I forgot that that's what this article was even about.
Yeah, I know, because like the title of the article says, it's comparing it to Old Testament law, but it's like so far we've just been learning about the U.S. system.
This is just a very powerful, like 2AR-ish quote. Jewish law treats criminals not as monsters. Incapable of reform. Okay. In the right hands, that's okay. Now I know we already have a bunch on that. The eye for an eye thing is very misunderstood. So I'm sort of skipping this because I know we have it from our Mike Materney article. Now, do we have it saved? I don't know. We should.
Well, what I ought to do, since nobody's done this yet, what I can do is I can go through the Mike Materney article, and I can.
That's exactly what you do. Do this process that we're doing right here.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, and do this process and cut everything useful from it. And then that way we can start adding it to our stuff.
Yeah, I'd be happy to actually. I have still in my folder right here the printed version that I highlighted to death. If that would help.
Oh yeah, that would be pretty awesome.
All right, I'll try to remember to bring it to Clip. Okay, now we're going to talk about interpreting the Hebrew Bible generally. I'm sort of just skipping that. Interpreting an eye for an eye in Jewish law. Whoa. I just saw something about Babylon. Hammurabi's Code.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah. I've used a lot of rhetoric about how Lex Talionis was kind of written as like the antithesis to the Code of Hammurabi. But I think we only actually have one piece of evidence on that from the library trip, and I don't even think it's in our files. So
Okay.
if we had something on that, that would be pretty good.
Yeah. I think this guy's too distracted by defending like Jewish thinking. Like this rambles a lot compared to the Materni one. So let's grab the Materni one, I think. Unless it's really good. Yeah, because the Materni one also argues that in a Roman law, they had eye for an eye meant the same thing as like a restraint. There is no instance in Jewish history of its literal application ever having been carried out. Interesting. Okay. Wait, rule of the death penalty. I'm gonna skip it because I feel like we've been making exceptions for as AF. We're generally not saying rehabilitate murderers. Maybe we are, but I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, yeah, because Charlie had kind of hit me on that in our round. He was talking about how rehabilitation is really only useful to drug criminals and other such crimes like that don't often have victims. So because of that, our main focus ought to be, or what we value higher should be what we use against crimes with victims, which would be like murder, violent assault. And it was actually a good argument because what he had done is he had got me to admit that it is good to punish the 20% of the time, when it's murderers and violent offenders, but the other 80% we should rehabilitate. But he kind of used that to his own advantage. It was interesting.
Interesting.
So I thought I had, and I feel like this could be good practice, especially with Mr. Ragnars's thing on Wednesday. Maybe for an assignment, I could send out an article to each person and have them cut research from it.
Yes, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of go and find like 10 other really good articles that I think might be worth something, and then I'll send one out to each person and we can cut through those.
Great. So this is really cool because I'm getting an argument here that's new to me, which is that atonement is a form of punishment that restores the victim. And so it has a byproduct of rebalancing, but that's not its purpose. The purpose is to repair the offender's soul. I'm going to grab this whole thing and then do some underlining. So that's even better. This is great. Whoops. What did I just close? I don't know. This fixing of the offender's soul is a deontological version of rehabilitation. This is a great response when people say rehabilitation is utilitarian and retribution is, a justice issue, so it's deontological. We could come back with actually the Jewish concept of atonement is the deontological version of rehabilitation. Oh, that is so cool. Also, I haven't looked through this, so I'm just guessing, but despair not. Like if you see the scroll bar, oh my goodness, it's only halfway down. Usually in a journal, the footnotes begin pretty soon. So let's see, we're on 743. Okay, maybe not. Wow, okay, this is super long. I lied. What were we at? 743. Okay, obstacles. I'm going to skim that.
Yeah, but like you said though, I think I'm like now that we're kind of in the body, I'm sure we're going to be getting into some stuff that's not as useful.
This is so, like, to me, what we're doing right now is why parents, without knowing, like, they know it, but they don't know exact mechanics of it, want people to debate. Is because of the education you get while reading these things. Which is why buying source books is bad for you.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Is like when we buy source books, all that is just somebody else who's cut an article for us, and then we're just reading what they cut.
Yeah.
But with this, like we're reading the entire article ourselves and getting in all the information, and then cutting what we think is necessary.
Yeah, and so we did all the thinking, and it's the thought process that's more impactful, I think, than just having cards, right? But many people have reduced debate to having cards instead of thinking. Oh, how deep and philosophical. Okay, incarceration in Jewish law. This is where he gets back to the 2 points we already had above. Yeah, and again, if I was by myself as a debater, I would read this whole thing, but we're on a little call making a video, so I won't. The Rambam. It would just be fun to say, actually, in cross-examination, if we analyze the use of prisons during the Jewish diaspora of 70 AD, we would find... Oh my goodness. Okay, alright, which killers were sent to where? American law compared. Oh. Okay, I like this paragraph. Jewish law recognized a dividing line between those who were beyond rehabilitating in this world. Answer to, but the death penalty. Jewish law recognized some must be rehabilitated in another world.
But the death penalty, though.
This is good stuff. Oh, I think I confuse people sometimes with this ATs. Sometimes A2 is better than answer 2.
I'm actually a bigger fan of AT because that just makes more sense to me.
Yeah, me too. The correction. Wow, this is deep. Actually has some interesting theological implications for Protestants too. All right, blah blah blah. Yay for headlines, right? Interesting. Wow. This is saying that for the cities of refuge to work, you have to admit what you've done, which is the modern statement of in order to be rehabilitated, like in order to cure yourself in Alcoholics Anonymous or something, you have to first admit you have the problem.
To me, like, this is actually really helpful for my senior thesis because I'm doing my senior thesis this year on restorative justice. And I think that's something that comes in handy with that is that since like you're having a dialogue between the victims and the offender, then it shows very clearly to the offender, that what they did was wrong. It gives them a chance to be able to recognize that what they did was wrong, and they often move from it.
Awesome. Debate meets academic pursuits. Yeah, dirty secret, like 80% of my college papers were backed by debate research.
Yeah, that's the great thing is like most of what I'm researching for senior thesis is on restorative justice, but like I also need a lot on, retribution and rehabilitation as well to kind of compare the values. And so like a lot of stuff that we're finding in debate kind of applies to that, and a lot of the stuff I'm finding over there also applies to debate.
Okay, so I'm going to argue that this is an alternate cause to recidivism with in-prison rehabilitation. Without earning respect from the community outside of prison rehabilitation is difficult. Okay, and now we have to notice that he has this section here, which is him quoting something else. It's a block quote. We need to make sure we add in quotation marks around that. And if we really wanted to, we can include this additional footnote if we thought it might be helpful, but in this case, we're not going to. Vocational. This is so awesome. I want to quote this in my AF case. I need to write another new AF case. Whee! Actually, I'm just going to include that. Oh, it links to the retribution thing. Yeah, it might even be worth like bolding every retribution and rehabilitation thing ever in our briefs. Could just do like a global bold of those words. This is a really bizarre argument. I'm not going to include it. One could if they wanted to argue the education. Okay, we'll include it. Why not? Educational. This is this guy's argument that educational rehabilitation occurred in cities of refuge. Okay. Okay, instead of allows that reasoning, we should actually give the reasons. And then we've done our duty of putting the warrant in the cart. Occurred in cities of refuge because he shall live equals you can't live without learning Torah. America. Okay. Whew, involuntary servitude. This is what I was waiting to get to, is basically like slavery as rehabilitated. It's highly controversial, which is why we debate, right? Right. Or No, does the 13th Amendment really allow slavery? 13th Amendment. Ah! What? Did you know this?
Wow, yeah, it says except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Wow.
Yeah, I'd never never noticed that before. Wow.
Okay, this is such a fascinating case. Like, so it should have a whole section in one of our briefs on this. And if we were to structure it out, it would be the 13th Amendment allows slavery in such cases. Okay, we call it involuntary servitude. The Emancipation Proclamation. You can tell I've been talking to you. '13th Amendment, U.S. Constitution. Bizarre. Okay. And then we would include under here the rest of the stuff that we've already grabbed, plus the quote we're about to grab.
And this is a perfect example. What's so amazing about cutting articles is it's like I would have probably never found that out if we weren't doing this.
Same.
Could be a pretty cool dinner conversation with the family. Oh, did you know that slavery is actually still legal in certain exceptions?
Okay. That boggles the mind. I am impressed. Okay. Indentured servitude is a method according to Jewish law and the United States is acceptable for punishment. Okay, I should underline this, but we need to wrap up the call. Relative humanness. Oh, good. Okay, so now there's a humane aspect of it. Oh my goodness. Wow. Yep. This is why we do our own research. Because, I'll tell you this, if I were a sourcebook publisher, as I have been in times past, I'd be pretty wary of publishing an article like this. I might not save this. But it's totally worth saving. So I actually would, knowing myself, but I would expect many not to. Okay, and so then that comes to all the laws about being kind to your slaves. And he answers all the objections. Whew. What is this? Seemingly objectionable aspects of Jewish servitude. I don't know how to tag this. Okay, Jewish law creates debtor's prison. That's such a clear statement. See, this is why I say there's an unlimited number of affirmatives this year, and you should have multiple ones. Like, you could have the restitution over criminal liberty one, and advocate for rehabilitation on the basis of indentured servitude, a biblically historical concept in the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. Hysterical case structure in an academic. Ways to be released from indentured servitude. 4. Without serving it out. Okay, looks like we're in conclusive material about prisons are bad. Okay, and so finally, like, this is usually good stuff to quote. Wow. From a Jewish law point of view, undue emphasis has been placed on retribution rather than rehabilitation and restitution. Exactly what he says. Second, skip death penalty stuff. Okay, I'm going to take this. The Jewish law approach allows us to be tough on crime, yet have sensible policy that doesn't doom us to a spiral, a ballooning prison population. While we have been on this call, at least 3 trucks have come delivering stuff. 'Tis the season. Alright. Just listen. Whew. This is great. I love this final quote. Relying on the Bible or making sensible policy requires rejecting the prison. So now you all have just learned what it's like to write for a source book. This used to be all day, every day. So final question is, what do you do with this? And when you're on your own, you organize it all yourself. Look, we just came up with 11 pages in an hour and a half while making a lot of commentary on it from a very good in-depth article. So my argument is, this is a huge article, very in-depth, that most people in clubs should be able to handle 1 to 3 articles a week in plenty of time. And then Mark, this is why I've said all season that you're going to be busy, is they shouldn't have to just go figure out where each of these goes and paste it in there. Because having to do that is just too much on top of it. That should be one person's job. Your job is to receive 11 pages of research, which in the past I know sounded scary to people, but hopefully we just saw it's not that scary. To receive 11 pages of research and then stick the right quotes in the right places. And I see from this, there are probably 4 different places that quotes might go and be divided up. A bit on Jewish law, a bit on the history of rehabilitation in the United States, a bit on utilitarianism versus deontological, and involuntary servitude section. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And the great thing about this too is, since the tags, kind of go over the key warrants for the most part, it would be pretty easy to look through and see what isn't helpful and what doesn't actually end up really going anywhere, and then being able to see what should go somewhere.
Exactly. So take this, and it's the unorganized queue, and then you just come in here and are constantly moving stuff out of it while other people are putting stuff into it. And you put it against our table of contents in here, and now I can go take a look and see when I look at this stuff, I'm like, wow, this is not formatted well. It is not easy to figure out. And it needs to look more like a bunch of these with sections. Does that work?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think a big thing that's going to help with that is, for me to fix this now, I would have to go through and cite pretty much everything over again. But with this in mind, from now on, people will be citing it the right way, and that'll make it easier for me to organize everything.
Yes. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, Joseph, any last questions?
No questions. This has just really made it a lot more clear, because before, I'd see all the information and think, wow, it's crazy talk. But now I'm starting to see how it's way, way more doable and understanding how it works out.
Great.
And I think a helpful tool, what I might do is those, because those files that you sent me a while back ago, I actually put in the drive, those like criminal justice files.
Mhm.
I ought to like assign people to read those as well, because I think those files are a perfect example of what we're striving for. The organization that it has and all the evidence that's in there,
Yeah.
the quality that it is.
Yeah, so for everybody who's on the who watches the video, what he's referring to are things like I sent from criminal justice year. We had made a source book on
Yeah, I
policy,
think
and it like
the
looks like
file
this.
name under the thing is called Isaiah Criminal Justice Files, and that has all the stuff you sent me.
Oh, I know what you mean. In the drive. Yeah, okay, so that was the one we were just looking at, is right here. And then other ones like that. So they have this table of contents is automatically generated because down here we have, just like we're looking at, tag, citation, quotation, tag, citation, quotation, tag, citation, quotation. That's exactly it. Great. Well, thanks you two for participating as representatives, and I will stop the recording and hopefully be able to upload it so we can all use it. And I will send Mark, so I'm going to send you just a bunch of links that I don't want to have up anymore. So like this one and this one need to be gone through in the way that we just went through that one.
All right, cool. Yeah, so probably over the next couple of weeks, I'll go through a couple of those articles and also the Mike Minturni article and start cutting those. And then I will also research and find probably like 10 to 15 really good articles I found, and then have sign other people to cut through them, and then I'll organize it all.
Great.
Cool.
Great. Thank you.